Hey guys, how's it going? TechSpecs here, hope you're doing well. In today's video, we're going to be comparing the two most widely used voice assistants, Apple's Siri and Google's Assistant. For anyone new around here, how my comparison style videos work is that I split the entire video into categories and then put each thing to the test against each other in them categories. Whoever wins the round will earn a point, and whoever has the most points at the end will be crowned the winner. This is to make it fair and unbiased, but also just to let me go into detail. The categories for this video are going to be interface, voice recognition, general knowledge, compatibility, and finally, automation. As always, the timeline down below will have chapters if you want to skip ahead to any particular category, but without further ado, let's begin. Okay, so let's start off with the interface of each assistant. With iOS 14, Siri has gotten a refreshed and more compact interface, with a new blob animation that only takes up the bottom portion of the display. Most of the information that Siri shows you will appear in a notification style banner at the top of the screen, and although it looks really clean, I must say that sometimes it can feel very bare. I know that some people didn't like Siri taking up the whole screen before on iOS, but I do think that it makes more sense to have this compact design on iPadOS or on macOS, because on the iPhone, you can't even interact with what's behind Siri without closing it. Google Assistant also has a similar interface to Siri, in the sense that it only takes up part of the screen, but instead, I think it has a much cleaner animation as you speak, and it doesn't make it seem like you should be able to interact with what's behind it, even though it's also an overlay. Along with that, the interface comprises of the user and the assistant in a message style format, with some suggestions on what to ask next along the bottom. And the overall interface is a lot richer with images, maps, websites and more, with data that's pulled from all of Google's services. And that means that this round Google Assistant wins the point, as it just makes it a lot easier to understand what's going on, and also provides you with a lot more information to make the experience more visually useful than Siri. The next category is voice recognition. This is very important, as a voice assistant needs to be able to understand lots of different types of voices. To test this out, I came up with 3 different questions to ask Siri and Google Assistant using 4 different types of voices, and I found that there is actually a difference in how well they understand each voice. The selection of voices that I chose included my own voice as a benchmark, a child's voice, an adult woman's voice, and an adult man's voice that had a slight accent, so that there was a lot of diversity. The first question was, what is the weather going to be like next week in Shanghai? And Google Assistant managed to cope fine with every voice, showing the exact same result for everybody. Siri on the other hand found both my voice and the female voice a lot easier to understand, and there was a significant delay with the accented voice and the child's voice. The next question was a little easier and was, when did the first iPhone launch? To which again, Google Assistant answered with ease for everybody with a nice graphic of an iPhone and the date that the original one launched. Siri instead produced some, let's say, interesting results. For everyone but myself, Siri answered Apple.com should be able to answer that question and more, which in of itself isn't exactly helpful at all. With my voice, however, Siri brought up 3 websites that are all about the Apple Watch, not the iPhone. I know, right? Really random. I did do a repeat with my voice later on, and Siri did eventually come up with the same result that it did for everybody else, but even then, it's a bit weird. I asked for an iPhone, I got an Apple Watch. Finally, the third question was, what is the cost of a Cybertruck? To which Google Assistant showed $69,900 for everybody except the male accented voice, to which it showed $40,000 instead. For whatever reason, it chose to use a different website as a source for one person, but I mean, it technically wasn't wrong. It just showed different models of the Cybertruck. Siri instead answered everybody in the same way, but struggled a little with the child's voice and took a little longer to answer. But everyone was given the same 3 websites to look at, so at least it was consistent. However, as shown by these 3 tests, Google Assistant is definitely much better at understanding lots of different voices, so that earns it another point, making the score 2-0. Continuing on from testing voices, I also did a general knowledge test to see how well both Siri and Google Assistant could answer various factual questions that I had organised. So, let's see who revised for their test. The first questions were mainly ones that you could just pull from Wikipedia, like who is Marques Brownlee, how old is Joe Biden, or when was YouTube created, and all of them were pretty much answered with ease. The next question though, where is Paris located, made me laugh quite a bit. As you would expect, Google Assistant showed me a section of Google Maps over Paris, which is the city. Siri just told me, I can't find anyone named Paris in your contacts. I was just like, why? To recover from that, I gave both of them some easier questions to answer, like why are plants green, and then to perform a basic calculation, again both of which were answered in the same way. Then I asked something a little more generic, like how do you make pizza, which requires a bit more thought as there's more than one way to answer it. Google Assistant gave me a long list of recipes that I could follow from a bunch of different cooking websites like Simply Recipes or BBC Good Food, whilst Siri only provided 3 websites which were pretty much of the same thing. The next question was, tell me about coronavirus, and Google Assistant showed me a render of some virus particles and a Wikipedia definition of what COVID-19 is. I also just like how at the bottom there's a suggestion to ask how do you wash your hands, which is a nice touch. Then I asked some more general fact questions like what is Tokyo Tower, and then who is Marcus Aurelius, which were both answered exactly the same way, only with Google Assistant again providing some more facts and extra detail. And finally, to finish off, I tried to ask another map related question of where is the nearest Apple store, to which Google Assistant just gave me the direct answer of the closest Apple approved reseller, while Siri gave me the top 5 closest actual Apple stores. I mean, both technically weren't wrong, but I think that Google Assistant did a better job as it showed me the one that was actually closer than all of the 5 that Siri suggested. So, after these 11 questions, Google Assistant answered all of them perfectly, while Siri got 10 out of 11, which also isn't too bad. I still think though that Google Assistant did a much better job by providing a lot more extra detail and information to go with each answer, and for that, it leaves Siri in the dust, making the score 3-0. Moving on, the next category is compatibility. Being made by Apple means that Siri will only work on Apple devices, of course trying to push you into using Apple services as much as it possibly can. And although it's not like Siri can't use any third-party services at all, it isn't exactly straightforward in how you can change from the defaults. Recently, you may have heard that in iOS 14.5, Siri can now change the default music player when you ask it to play a song, but that's one of the few things that Siri will actually allow you to change. It's not like you can have a different weather app or a different web browser for when you ask Siri a question. Some third-party apps do have integration with Siri, so for example you could have Google Maps or Waze instead of the default Apple Maps when you want to navigate somewhere, but it would just be a lot more useful to have a long list in settings where you can change all the services that Siri will use by default, like in this concept by 9to5Mac. Google Assistant on the other hand supports many more devices, including Apple's ones, and offers an extensive settings menu within Snapshot where you can change everything from the default music and podcast services, the news service, payment methods, to-do lists, food preferences, stocks, and more. This freedom of choice is a lot better as it means that Google Assistant can know your preferences and then help you out based on what it knows about you. In terms of smart home devices, for Siri, all accessories need to be HomeKit certified in order to work through the Home app, and I can imagine that it's usually pretty hard to get out of the quote-unquote walled garden when you've integrated your entire house to work with Apple's ecosystem. In contrast, there are many more smart home accessories that work with Google Assistant, like Nest thermostats, Philips Hue bulbs, hub displays, as well as TVs that have Chromecast support or Android TV. The list goes on and on. Google Assistant accessories also tend to be cheaper overall if you plan on making your own smart home. So for that, Google Assistant definitely wins the point, and that makes the score 4-0. The final category is automation. Both Siri and Google Assistant have their own ways of letting you create conditional automations via their respective Siri shortcuts or routine settings. Siri shortcuts take up an entire app on your Apple devices, and although at first it may seem like more Apple bloatware, once you start getting into it, you can actually make some really useful shortcuts for Siri to use when it hears your own custom phrases. I personally only use a few shortcuts from Outlook and TickTick to show me my schedule or my to-do list for the day, but there is a massive gallery that contains many pre-made shortcuts, both first and third party, that you can add to Siri if you're just starting out. Not only that, but Siri can also learn from your routine and then suggest you different automations that it thinks you might want to implement. For example, whenever I connect my Sennheiser Momentum headphones to my iPhone, I usually go and listen to music via Apple Music, and Siri knows that most of the time I go and shuffle all of the songs in my library and listen to them that way, so it suggested to me a shortcut that automatically shuffles all of my songs for me when it sees that them headphones are connected to my iPhone. That's just one of the many types of automation that you could have, and if you have a spare iPad or Apple TV lying around, you can even set that up as a hub for your smart home for all of your automation needs. Google Assistant's routines is also essentially the same as Siri's shortcuts, but it's not as straightforward to use. The settings for routines are buried within Snapshot, and then under your Google account, and then under routines, which is at the top with popular settings. There are 5 pre-made ones that you can use when you say the phrases good morning, bedtime, I'm home, leaving home, commuting to work, or commuting home. And of course, you can set up various things to happen when you say each of them phrases. So for example, you could have a briefing of the weather, the news, and the travel time to get to work whenever you say good morning. Like Siri shortcuts, you can also create your own custom actions that go off of custom phrases, but I will say that the whole experience seems to be designed much more for people who want some serious automation instead of beginners who are just trying things out. The whole process works really well for both of them though, but purely due to the beginner-friendly design and the extensive gallery of starter shortcuts, Siri finally wins around, making the final score 4-1. So, with that final score settled, it's obvious that Google Assistant is superior in terms of knowledge, voice recognition, and support for various accessories and devices. That's not to say that Siri sucks though, as Siri is getting a lot better than it used to be, but it still has a long way to go before it's on Google Assistant's level. Until then though, Google Assistant is by far the winner of the two, and it's probably the best option if you want a voice assistant who does and knows pretty much everything you could want it to know and do. And that's about it for this video. I know it was a bit of a long one, but if you enjoyed it, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and if you're new here, make sure to subscribe as it would really help the channel out. This is TechSpecs here, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.